In class, we had begun to talk about Constable and look at him more closely at the National Gallery. He's a specialist in landscape painting, almost exclusively does landscape painting. He does commissioned works, for example, like the Weavenhoe Park in Essex, which was made for the owner of the manor in the background, as well as landscapes in the picturesque mode, like this painting of Salisbury Cathedral. Constable had actually been friends by this time for about 20 years with the Bishop of Salisbury, who was an important patron of his works. I don't know if this was made for him, but I think that his friendship and close association with the Bishop of Salisbury led to his many different images of Salisbury Cathedral. Many of his images focus on Suffolk County, the area where actually he grew up. And in this picture from your textbook, we actually see the mill that was owned by his father. This was the house and the river where he grew up. And in fact, it's the Store River. And Constable, later in his life, talked about the fact that he associated the banks of the Store River with his careless boyhood. And so he's looking back at it wistfully, longingly, and this helps to make it even more romantic. He depicts this area where he had grown up. He's, by the way, remember he's now moved to London, but he depicts this lost area, if you will, as unspoiled by any kind of human progress. In other words, it falls into that romantic theme that nature is powerful enough to resist industrial progress. At the same time, I think he's also idealizing nature. He sees it as a simpler way of life where, and again, this is a romantic concept, where the residents are not in chains, but are free from the bonds of modernism. Now, as a landscape painter, he often begins by working outside. Here's a sketch he made on the site. What he's doing is he's trying to study sort of the effects of nature, how the wind blows in the trees, how the clouds form and dissipate, how the light from the sky shimmers across the Store River. These sketches are rather small. This is about 10 by 12 inches, and they were never meant to be exhibited or seen by anyone other than Constable. These were exclusively for his own use to be put toward the final composition. And in fact, after working outside, making these vigorous sketches of the area, he will then go into the studio and take those sketches and make a composition that will manipulate things in preparation for the final composition. These works are done on a red ground that you can build both the light and the dark up on. And you can see it gives it this overall purple tonality because we can see some of the ground peeking through behind the different clouds. Then after doing two different versions of the landscape, he finally polishes it up, if you will, makes it acceptable for display. So the final work is the only one that ever saw the light of day, and it's slightly larger. It's about 3 times as big across as the sketch is. The sketch is about 11 inches. This is about 36 inches across, and larger for display in the Royal Academy. So his process was to make really 2 completely realized paintings only for himself, only as studies, in order to arrive at this final composition for public display. Now, all that said, as a landscape specialist, Constable suffered from some discrimination. In common thinking in the 19th century, landscape painting was seen as being very low in status, not very important as a genre of painting, and not requiring very much in the way of talent from the artists. And the belief was that the only way that a landscape painting could have any meaning, any importance, any consequence, was if it included biblical or historical or mythological narrative, because this is exactly what the old masters had done with their landscape paintings, was to stick in a historical scene as an excuse for painting the landscape and to give it some relevance, some meaning. Constable is rebelling against that. He's painting pure landscapes that seem to be, for the most part, without any real narrative. and certainly no historical narrative in the classical sense. In this respect, he's making the case that landscape is its own beast, its own importance. And as a result of the prevailing prejudices at the time against landscape painting, he was only able to ever sell 20 pictures in England while he was alive. And he never attained full membership in the Royal Academy until 1829, by which point he was in his early 50s. All of this was because how landscape painting was derided by critics. And because of this prejudice against landscape, in 1818, Constable began an effort to try to raise the status of landscape painting. He began to work on a series of 6-foot-wide landscape pictures in the hopes that the size alone would make the landscape paintings as important as other kinds of paintings, other genres. Part of the reason is, of course, personal. He wants to make landscape painting important, but another part of this endeavor is the fact that he was recently married, eventually have 7 children, and he was struggling to make ends meet because he couldn't sell that many paintings. In fact, he's even forced to turn to portrait painting at this time simply to make money. So the 6-footer project, if you will, was part of achieving a number of things. Better recognition for himself, better recognition for the kinds of paintings that he's doing, and, of course, putting some food on the table. This new project of making 6-foot-wide landscape paintings, massive landscape paintings, presented various challenges to the way that he would work. When you're enlarging a sketch done on site from 12 inches to 36 inches, like he did for the flat mill picture, that's one thing. But exploding them up to 6 feet across is another thing entirely. All you have to do is think about the relationship of brush strokes to the objects that you're depicting. And that's very different at the 6-foot level than it would be at the 1-foot level. Here we see a detail of the cows wading in the Store River in the background. And so for this reason, instead of painting compositional sketches that were the same size as the outdoor sketches, his compositional sketches were also 6 feet across the base. That would lead us then to the final composition that was cleaned up for the Royal Academy. There's the final composition of the White Horse up in New York City. So these are both done on exactly the same scale, so that he can figure out exactly how to work the brush, how to work the paint on a scale such as this. But our version of the White Horse was never meant to be seen in public. It was done solely as a study leading to the final work. In fact, it was later cleaned up by another owner and finished up. And those later editions were in fact cleaned away in the 1990s. So the finished work here, we see his move away from the sketchier quality of the study to the more polished quality of the finished river. Note the addition of the red accents that we talked about in class with the barge here. What he depicts is a simple way of life again. Here is a horse that normally tows the barge down the cart path, and this is the place where the cart path has to cross the river. So the horse has climbed onto the barge that he's going to pull, or that he's been pulling. They're then going to pull themselves across the river with a tow rope, and then the horse will be let off to continue towing the barge upriver. Both this painting, the White Horse, and the painting of his father's mill are both on the same stretch of the Store River, the stretch of the river where he grew up. Here's a map of the river, and there's Flatford Mill as well, and you can see that the White Horse is here looking this way, and the Flatford Mill picture is upriver, sort of looking back toward the same area. The reason that Constable focused on this region, like we've talked about before, is it's this simple way of life that he longs for now living in London. It's the area of his youth. But over and above that, he said that his familiarity with the landscape helped him focus on details and effects of light rather than getting distracted by seeing something new. In the painting that's in your text, the Haywing, we see this same house from a different point of view. Right, so here we're looking this way toward Willie Lott's house, and in the Haywing, we're just on the other side of it, looking back in the other direction. As I just mentioned, this belonged to his neighbor, Willie Lott, who was in his 80s, and by this point in his life, had never left this region. I think for Constable, this house becomes this metaphor for what he wished he had never done. The simple way of life that he's left behind to make a go of it in London. And the house becomes, I think, a symbol of harmony with nature, how it's nestled gently within the trees. Time has sort of stood still. Yes, nature goes on, and the works of man break down a bit. The windows have been broken up. But at the same time, there's a sense of simple harmony as this is nestled deep within the trees. You'll notice that there's a washerwoman on the porch, either filling water or perhaps cleaning clothes in the store, and you have the cute little dog in the foreground who's barking as this empty hay truck fords the shallow section of the river. It's almost as if this simple way of life is deemed to be superior to the industrialized city. There are no steam engines here. We have the water dripping off of the cart. You can almost hear the whip and the dribble of the cartwheels. Again, the constable's trademark red touches to the team of horses pulling the cart. And if we look over on the right, we'll notice in the banks nestled here in the thistle, a little boat has been pulled over, and we have a gentleman about to throw out a fishing line as ducks paddle peacefully by and cows in the fields, with workers in the fields as well. This is, again, a very calm and peaceful environment, and again, I think intended entirely as an antidote to the industrial city. It's worth noting that while Constable struggled in England, he was a huge success abroad. This picture, the Haywing, was exhibited in the Paris Salon in 1824 alongside a great number of French works, and it was widely praised by everyone who saw it and had a huge impact on the development of French landscape painting. And in fact, Constable's success also translated to the marketplace. He was able to sell as many paintings in 1 year in France as he did during his entire career in England. Friends said to him, "You really ought to move there. You ought to go to France. You'll be a much more successful painter there than you are here." And he said he'd rather be poor in England than be a rich man abroad. So that's it for this little discussion of Constable, who we talked about in class, and we'll talk about at the National Gallery some more. This is meant simply to augment that discussion. See you back in class.